Uh, Welcome everybody to the very first summer session of the 2021-2022 academic year. This is always one of my favorite times of year where we get to meet a whole new group of folks. My name is Clint Woods. I am the president of Californians Advancing Civic Education, which is the organization that is putting on this here Zoom summer session today. I really appreciate each and every one of you taking the time out of your summer to do something academic, which I appreciate you guys doing that. I'm sure that there are lots of other things that you could be out there doing, and I appreciate you all taking the time. So what I'm going to do, first of all, is kind of give you a rundown of what we're going to be doing today. And then I'm gonna introduce you to some of the other volunteers who are here to help you along this process. And then we're gonna give you an opportunity to ask some questions. I'll come out of the gate with a little bit of some bad news. And that news is that while we had promised that the director of the Center for Civic Education, Christopher Riano, was going to be here to introduce himself and answer your questions. Unfortunately, he had a personal issue and will be unable to appear today. We're hoping that he will come back in the next summer session, either 2 weeks from now or the one in August. But he sends his regards, and I know he would be very, very excited to see so many bright and excited faces that we can see today. I do have some news about how the rest of the school year will go in terms of We the People that I will share sort of in that time frame. It's not a whole lot, but I was on a call with Christopher Riano earlier this week, and he was able to share a few things that I will pass along to all of you. Let's get into the meat of it. The point of this summer session is to introduce you to some kind of broad We the People concepts. We're going to be talking about how a hearing works, how a We the People hearing works. We're also going to be talking about how about some content, we're going to be talking about the branches and how the branches of government and how they interact. And another really great thing that we're going to be doing is we're going to be showing you how a We the People Zoom hearing works. We have a group of very excellent and excited alumni volunteers who are going to show you how it all works. I'm going to introduce them in a little bit. And then we are going to break you all up into kind of ad hoc units where you will have to come to a decision and make an argument in a very low pressure, low key, but still We the People-y kind of way. And we're going to be asking you Q&A questions so you get used to the process. So that's sort of the basic overview. There is a more detailed agenda that should be in the materials we sent you. Hopefully you all have those materials. If you do not, maybe Katie can drop a link to them into the chat. So I've introduced myself. It would be really great. So I'm gonna let the rest of the CACE volunteers introduce themselves. I guess I should tell you actually a little bit more about who I am and why I'm here before I do so. My name is, as I said earlier, my name is Clint Woods. I am the president of Californians Advancing Civic Education. I am also an alum of the program from back in 1995 from Amador Valley High School, and I have to say this, it's your first time meeting me, so I have to say it, where we were lucky enough to win the state and national titles. Yes, that's right. It's one of 3 national titles ever won by California. That experience was so great for me that, I went on to become an attorney, and right now I am a deputy attorney general with the California Department of Justice, working in the government law section, which means I get to do constitutional law as a job. It's still new for me, and I get giddy when I think about that. So I really, really like this program. It is a program that really changed my life, and hopefully it's something that you all will get a great deal out of as well. And so with that, I'm gonna point out I'm gonna sort of like ask other people to introduce themselves. So Sean, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, good morning, everyone. My name is Sean Gentry. I'm another volunteer for CACE, member of the board, and I've been doing volunteer work with the We the People program since roughly 2007, so it's been a while, and I was on the Foothill team in the 2001-2002 year, and I was Unit 1. I will echo what Clint just said about his experience, which for me, it was a little bit life-changing as well. You know, I didn't realize it right away, but it eventually sort of inspired me to go to law school. So, you know, now I am also a lawyer. I practice employment law now at a firm in downtown San Francisco. It's a small firm called Ad Astra Law Group. And, you know, I advise employers on, you know, all the ins and outs of California employment law, which is quite complex. You will hear a little bit from me later, and I can't help but use employment law as some of the examples that I'll cite for, you know, interesting things from the legislature. But I also am historically a litigator, so I do, you know, court cases involving wrongful termination and things of that nature. You know, this is a great program. The summer sessions is a highlight for me as well. So I'm really looking forward to this program today and seeing all of you throughout the year.
Great. Suba, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Suba. I'm also on the CASE board. I've been volunteering since 2016. I'm an alum of the program, Foothill High's Unit 5, class of 2011. I am not a lawyer, so there is a pathway to do that after this program as well. I currently work at Facebook as a tech product manager. So very different, lots of good questions about privacy in that space. So always a fun challenge. Shall I pass it to Michael?
Sure.
Sure. Thanks, Suba. My name is Michael. I am a CASE volunteer going into probably the 4th or 5th year. As of recently on the board, really excited to be back for another year. I am also not a lawyer. I work as a social sector consultant across a wide variety of issues with foundations and nonprofits. So right now I work on emergency food and sexual and reproductive health. I was a Unit 6 alum from Arcadia back in 2016. So yeah, excited to meet you all and get started this year.
Great.
Shall we go to Katie?
Hi, everyone. I'm Katie. I am a CASE volunteer and a 2016 alum from San Ramon Valley High School, which doesn't have a program anymore. This program definitely changed what I am doing with my life. I went and studied politics at UC Santa Cruz, and now I work in the California State Assembly.
Great. Daniel, where are you?
Hey, everyone. Yeah, I'm here. Hello. Hey, everyone. I'm an Amador alum once upon a time. But yeah, so also got the good fortune of going to nationals. Wasn't able to win it, unfortunately, but came close second. But yeah, Unit 6. In a very recent past life, I was a cybersecurity consultant out of Accenture, but I am now unemployed, about to go to grad school at UC Berkeley, studying development engineering. So how do you solve problems in developing countries and developing communities using engineering? So yeah, excited to work with you all. And I don't know who to popcorn to.
Give it to Ria.
Ria.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ria. I'm a 2015 Amador alumni. I was Unit 2. Now I'm working in the medical industry in a small medical device startup. We're in the clinical phase of like the clinical trials. So I'm learning like the regulatory side of what it means to be an engineer, I suppose, and do medical stuff.
Great. I think, and if I'm not mistaken, that's all of the CACE folks, I'm gonna introduce you to our alumni volunteers in a little bit. Okay, as you saw, there's a wide variety of experiences here from CACE. All of these folks have been volunteering with the program, volunteering for We the People for a number of years, went through the program. And, you know, there's a couple lawyers, I guess, but you don't have to do that. What CACE is, and I'll give you a little bit of background on what we do and have done, and in order to, you know, let you know kind of what we can do for you. CACE as an organization, Californians Advancing Civic Education, was an organization that I started with another former alum, Benjamin Glickman, about 11 years ago now. And the idea with CACE is that we are a nonprofit that is designed to provide financial and also volunteer support for civic education in California in general, but specifically to help out We the People students and their teachers as best we can. And the reason we do that is that, as you guys will all find out over the next year, that We the People is a wonderful experience. It is a great way to learn about civics, to learn about the Constitution, to learn about law in general, but it's also a lot of work. And it's a lot of work not just for you, but also especially a lot of work for your teachers. And so what CACE is designed to do is to provide volunteer resources and support for all of you to take some of the burden off of your teachers. And so what we have done now for about 6 or 7 years now is we have started out doing these sort of summer sessions that are designed to get you familiar with the We the People program before you have to go through it. And another thing that we try to do with these summer sessions is create a sense of community around the program in general, so that you're going to meet, if you're someone from Arcadia, you're going to meet some folks from Foothill. If you're someone from Amador, you're going to meet someone from Foothill and Arcadia. And you're all going to be competing against each other at some level over the year. And that's great. Competition is super fun. But the point of this program is to learn and also to create a sense of community among We the People folks. And so we've had, I think, a really good experience around that. So that's the summer. So, you know, today we're going to talk about the branches. We're going to talk about which branch is the most powerful. And I correctly am going to be arguing for the judiciary. Daniel incorrectly is going to be arguing for the executive. And Sean also extremely incorrectly is going to be arguing for the legislative.
Extremely.
So, yes. Oh my God. Anyway, so we're going to do that a little bit later. But the idea is that, you know, it's some content that you guys can think about as you go forward. Next summer session, we're going to be introducing you to sort of natural rights philosophers and classical Republican thought. We're going to have a lecture from the reigning state champion teacher, David Martinez from Irvington last year, where he's gonna talk about give you a little bit of entry into those sorts of concepts, and you're gonna talk about them again amongst yourselves. And then we'll have another summer session in August where we talk a little bit about the Bill of Rights and incorporation and some stuff like that. And then after that, we have programs throughout the year. We are going to be doing a testimony writing workshop in probably October-ish, after you guys have been set into units. Although I think, and I'm not sure whether Arcadia might be in units already. I really don't know. I know that Arcadia does it really early. Amador and Foothill wait a little bit, and that's great. Whatever works for you guys. And then if you want, in advance of your regional competition and or your state competition, we have been running practices for schools that are going through those competitions where we get a bunch of volunteers like the ones that you've just met, and you run through your testimony and Q&A and get a lot of really great feedback. We find that those are very helpful. And so there is a lot of opportunities for you to use us as resources. If when you're going through, we can also offer you, and students haven't really used this much over the past few years, but we have a student Slack, and I realize Slack is like sort of an old people thing now. And I think like the youths use Discord or something else, which terrifies me. Anyway, the upshot is like, if you want to just talk to a volunteer about a testimony that you're going through, or talk to a lawyer, or talk to an alum, we can provide you access to those folks to help you kind of take your We the People game to the next level. That's the point of CACE as it pertains to you. So that's kind of what we do. A lot of the folks that you've just met, will be judging at various levels of the competition, your regional, your state. Some of us, if you're lucky enough to get that far, have judged at the national level. And so, we have a lot of experience with this program, and I think it's good to allow you to, get to know us a little bit and ask questions about what judges like to hear. So that's kind of what CACE does. Does anybody else have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I've got one thing I think is worth mentioning, which is in a lot of these sessions on Zoom, we are going to do breakout rooms, I think in all of our sessions, to break it up a little bit and give you all a chance to talk to each other about specific topics. And so I think, that should hopefully be entertaining and enjoyable. And, today, for example, the topic is on what is the most powerful branch of government. And then as we get, further along, for example, testimony writing workshop, the breakout rooms will be more focused on, your first testimony and some brainstorming for that.
Great. Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of that, while I think most of our events are going to be done via Zoom for at least this semester, for sure. I do know that there are high-level conversations that are being had among the Center for Civic Education as to what level of in-person is going to be this year. My understanding is that at least for the national competition, that they really, really want to do it in person this year, which means that if you are lucky enough if you work hard enough and you're lucky enough to win the state competition, then you can probably get to Washington, D.C. I know that they are also working on a way to do some sort of hybrid types of competitions. And I don't know the details of that, but what we found out in the last year and change since COVID was that while it's a pain in the butt to do things via Zoom, and it's not always great, and it's kind of better to be in person in a lot of ways, the fact that, for example, so many people are here from Arcadia and other Southern California schools is evidence that doing things on Zoom, it does allow not just us with CACE, but with the Center for Civic Education to reach folks that they wouldn't ordinarily have been reached, and allows folks to participate in ways that they wouldn't have been able to participate before. So there's benefit to doing stuff online, to doing competitions online. So we'll see. I know that, for example, the regional competition, which typically takes place in early December, we have not decided whether or not to do it in person or via Zoom. Either way, it will likely be happening. Sorry, the Northern California regionals will likely be happening sort of that first week in December. And I think that that's generally where the Southern California regionals will also be, or at least were last year.
And
so,
Clint, maybe it's worth noting that the Northern California region at least does a district level scrimmage a week or so before the regionals. And again, I don't know if it'll be in person or not. I think what I'll do is whatever regionals is, we'll try to do the same thing for the district so that it's, you know, a true preparation session.
Great. Yes. Thank you for pointing that out. Okay. So that's the sort of news that I can give in terms of what I heard from Chris Riano. I will also share, though this isn't, you know, all that useful to all of you, that they are doing a very good job of raising funds, that their fundraising for the past year has been very high. So hopefully if they have more money, then hopefully that means some more in-person stuff. That's my hope. So does anybody have any questions about either CACE or the Center for Civic Education or anything that I have mentioned or anybody has mentioned so far? You can either speak up or put it in the chat. Okay. Let's see, what's next on the agenda? Okay, well, so one thing, and I guess I can't see, I'm gonna put my view to gallery view. And of the students, how many of you have watched a We the People hearing before? You can raise your hands. For students, a We the People hearing. How many, or let me ask you another question. How many of you have not seen a We the People hearing before? That's quite a few of you. Okay, that's good. That's great. And why is that great? Because by the end of the day, all of you will have seen a We the People hearing. Well, what the heck is a We the People hearing? That's a great question that I just asked myself. But I would like somebody else to answer that question. Ria Schroff, would you like to give our wonderful students from all over the state a sort of rundown as to what a We the People hearing is?
Sure. I think I might screen share just so I can show the layout that I have, that little diagram.
Yeah.
Well.
And maybe you can also give them a rundown of how of the units, how schools are broken up, how teams are broken up as well, and then the hearings.
Great. All right. Let's see if I can make this actually fill up my whole screen. All right. So you'll be broken up into 6 different units. The unit 1 will deal with philosophy and the foundations of the U.S. government. Unit 2 then goes into the founders, the framing of the Constitution, and that kind of period of history. Unit 3 goes through the Civil War, equal protection. Unit 4 goes into the institutions of U.S. government. In my mind, that ends up with a lot of FDR and that era. Then Unit 5 goes into the Bill of Rights, and Unit 6 is the current events unit, and deals with stuff, a lot of talk about today and connecting it back to the past. So when you go into your hearing, just looking at the bottom of the screen, you'll be set up across your panel, whichever unit that you're broken into, will be set up across from a group of judges. Or on Zoom, you'll have your screens on and the judges will have their screens on and everyone else will have their screens off. When you first meet the judges, you'll introduce yourselves. The judges will introduce themselves. You'll introduce your school, and then the judges will tell you about the question. They'll read the question that you've been studying about for the last several weeks out loud, and then tell you that you can start whenever you're ready. So then the first section of this will be a prepared statement. It'll be 4 minutes. You're gonna get it as close to 4 minutes as possible without going over, and you'll answer the 3 questions the main question and then the two sub questions that go with that question that referring to that the judges have just read. This prepared statement, something that you'll have notes for. You can read, and you'll basically be it'll be timed. And then once that's done, you'll go into the question and answer, which is a more dynamic portion in which you put your notes away and you end up just talking with the judges based on their questions that they have from your testimony and connecting it. So, and then at the very end, you'll have feedback from the judges for what they thought you did well and what they thought you could do better. And yeah, so that's the basic structure of the sections of the hearing. Does that make sense? So far, I can go over.
Hey, Ria, if I can add something really quick, I think this was something that I wish I knew going through the program. So in a past life, I actually worked on Capitol Hill as a policy researcher. So I didn't know this until I became an actual researcher on Capitol Hill. But this is actually a simulated congressional hearing, right? So this is what they actually do in the real world, where the judges are considered members of Congress, and they're asking you as the expert witnesses to provide your feedback on these topics in civics, right? Whether that is 1, 2, 3, and 4, and also a little bit more context with the units. So with the units, this is based off of the We the People textbook, right? So Unit 1 is actually Unit 1 in the textbook, Unit 2 is actually Unit 2 in the textbook, and so on and so forth. So I think it's just good context, and also to understand that like what you are doing is actually what happens on Capitol Hill, not just on Capitol Hill, but also in Sacramento and all the other state capitals. So yeah, I think it's pretty exciting to be a part of that.
So you're highlighting one of the many ways that the legislative branch is very powerful. Good. That's very good.
I don't know. I'm very opinionated about congressional hearings, Sean. We'll see.
Oh, thank you for that addition. Yes. So it definitely is a simulated hearing, and it's a really interesting experience too. I don't think that you guys will have experienced anything as it's a really formal but exciting atmosphere that makes it fun. I think it'll be the first time that you guys experience an atmosphere like that when you actually go into the hearings. So would now be a good time to go over scoring as well, so they understand like what parts go into it, or would that be later, Clint?
Sure, you can talk about scoring. We did have a question in the chat about what's the dress code.
Oh yes, so you guys will be dressed pretty formally. It's usually a suit. Yeah.
For competitions. Yeah.
Yes.
And I think it was Daniel. It was Daniel that, so like for practices, you don't have to dress up. But was it Daniel that like when you came to a practice one time, your unit convinced you that you had to dress like in a suit?
Maybe. I think that does ring a bell. Like I would be the dorky guy who would do that. But I think it just owned it up.
Yeah. So competitions are, it's formal. It's what you would wear to Congress or to a court if you had to go to court.
So will the same person deliver the same testimony every time, or will we be required to rotate? Okay, so that's a good question. The judges at the district, regional, state, and national competition will only see you guys individually deliver your testimony once as a unit. So your unit is going to spend several weeks before district or any of the other competitions after that, really honing in and tightening up this one testimony. You're going to get sick of all the judges and all of the alumni who are helping you, because we're going to be tearing it apart, basically restructuring it. It's not going to be the same testimony that you start with, that you give us the first time by the time you reach district, but you guys will section it out. You will section it out and be like, oh, I'll read this section, my unit mate will read this section, the third one will read this section, and you'll know when you go into the testimony at district who's reading what section for the prepared statements. When you get into the question and answer, that's going to be a free for all of you and your unit mates kind of vibing off of each other to decide who should talk when.
And we'll talk about some techniques later in the year for how to do Q&A effectively. So we've got good answers for a lot of this stuff, and we'll help you, and your teachers will definitely help you as well.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So now to go into the scoring, the things that you guys have to keep in mind as you're writing your testimonies to prepare and practicing Q&A to go into the competitions. This is what the judges are going to be scoring you on. Things that aren't on this probably don't, they might think about in their head, but if you see, this is what a score sheet looks like. They rate you on these 6 sections of these 6 sections, and that ends up being your score. So the first section would be, did you understand the questions about what the question entailed? Because there have been times that we've seen units in the past get really interested in the topic, but what ends up happening in their testimony or in the Q&A is they get, because of the interest in the original question, they go down a rabbit hole and end up answering something completely different by the end of that, and that would affect the understanding of, are you actually like understanding the question and applying that knowledge to the things that were asked of you. The next session was constitutional application. How are you bringing back the things that you're talking about to the foundations of constitutional history and its principles? And that might not necessarily just entail the United States Constitution. It'll entail case law throughout U.S. history as well, to be and the other parts of government that go into that are relevant to your question. Reasoning. How much were you backing up your question, your responses with logic and tying things together? Supporting evidence. What other evidence were you bringing in? So I kind of mix constitutional and supporting evidence, because some of the evidence will be clearly more of the other. Got a little in my mouth. Sorry. Yeah, so some of it will be you're bringing in other pieces of evidence from contemporary or historical evidence of things that are happening, and some things will apply to the Constitution, and those get separated out. Responsiveness, how much did you answer the question asked? And participation, did you balance the answers amongst your group members? So that's really going to be important in the Q&A, that one person didn't just answer for the entirety of the question and answer period, but you actually split it out amongst your members to an even balance.
Yeah, and there's a lot of overlap between these, as Ria just kind of pointed out, especially the constitutional application and supporting evidence, but there are distinctions, right? So you can have a lot of evidence where you talk about natural rights philosophers and, some current events and anecdotes. And if you don't tie it back to constitutional law or the Bill of Rights or something sort of related to our structures of government, then you may be missing the constitutional application score. Similarly, if you're just dropping a bunch of evidence, you're like, the First Amendment and John Locke and like blah, 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 but you don't explain to the judges how that answers the question, then you may do poorly on the reasoning score, for example, even though you had good evidence, and there's some overlap there. And similarly with responsiveness, you could have awesome evidence, but if it doesn't actually answer the question the judges posed to you or the testimony asked you to answer, then you're not being very responsive. So there's overlap, but also some distinctions, and the judges will be able to distinguish between those things. And again, we and your teachers will certainly help you navigate this throughout the year. We're just getting started, and there's lots of time to figure this all out.
Yeah,
I can jump in.
Go ahead, Michael.
I think one great way to think about it is that this should mimic a true congressional hearing. So if you think about what a member of Congress would want from you, an expert, they would want not just, strict evidence and answers to things that they could probably Google, but they want your kind of reasoned analysis. But they also want it with kind of backing evidence. At the same time, they want to know, constitutional application, is what they are asking you legal, so to speak. And obviously, if they had a panel of 3 folks, they wouldn't want just one person talking the whole time. So the more you can get yourself in that mindset of, they're treating you like experts and they're looking to you for certain things, I think you'll end up finding that you, just by nature of asking yourself that question, will fill out a lot of these categories pretty naturally.
That's a great point. And I really do want to underline a few things that Ria said about the categories here, the two of these 6 categories that we really want to focus on today at the very first summer session. And they're probably the 2 most basic categories of scoring. So it's the things that I want you to want all the students to focus on that we're going to be looking for when you guys are broken up into your units and you give your presentations. And that's understanding, the first category, just the basic, do you understand the main issue? And the main issue that you guys are going to be talking about is what is the most powerful branch of government? So in order to demonstrate that you understand that question, that means you're going to have to demonstrate that you understand what branches are, how they interact, and why one branch is more powerful than another, basically, or than the other 2. So that's the one that we're going to be focusing on. The other one we're going to be focusing on is participation. And that means, do you say stuff during the testimony and the Q&A? I have a question from somebody, from Claire from Foothill, saying, so are we all sharing a testimony, or can we have our own testimonies and opinions? The answer is sort of both. Your testimony, your unit testimony that you give is a unified testimony. Everybody shares the testimony in the sense that you're going to essentially write it out. And when you get to competitions, you're absolutely going to write it out. And you're going to present it together. But that doesn't mean that you all have to agree with each other necessarily. Sometimes, it's good to have agreement among the unit, but sometimes it's better to perhaps disagree and have different opinions. I always think it's really interesting when a unit, for example, on this question, can argue maybe 2 different branches are the most powerful, and that allows that unit to demonstrate understanding, because one person is going to be saying the judiciary correctly, and all of the reasons why it's the most powerful, and then the other person is going to say one of the other branches and some of the reasons why it's most powerful. Or in the Q&A, sometimes somebody might ask a follow-up question like, well, if the judiciary is the most powerful branch, which it is, should we put more checks on the judiciary? And you might, as a unit, you might disagree about whether or not additional checks on the judiciary are warranted. And you can talk about that in the Q&A, and you don't all have to agree on whether or not they're on that particular issue. So everybody's opinion does not have to be the same. But for the purposes of this session, we're going to be looking at understanding and participation. And so participation is, I think, it's simultaneously the most basic scoring category and sometimes the hardest to do well. You'll see in where it's listed there, it says, to what extent did most, and then underlying most, group members contribute to the group's presentation? And what that is for the most part, it's like, was there a balance of participation during the Q&A? That's kind of what judges tend to be looking for, because lots of times in the Q&A, it can be dominated by 1 or 2 people. And the easiest way to score a 10 on that participation score, all of these scoring categories are judged on a scale of 1 to 10. But I will say that, judges typically don't give below 5s. So it's really sort of a 5 to 10 scale generally. That said, the easiest way to get a 10 is to just have everybody contribute to the group's Q&A and group's presentation in a meaningful way. So what does a meaningful way mean? It means you actually say something with substance. And that is, it sounds easy, or it might sound hard. It's a little bit trickier than you think, but we're going to start practicing it today. So
I think it's worth noting that even though it says most here and most is underlined, it's been, in my experience at all levels of judging, that most of the judges look at it the entire group. So it's not, you know, if somebody doesn't speak at all in Q&A, the judges are certainly going to notice it, and it will prevent you from getting a 10. But I love to give 10s on participation scores, and I think a lot of judges do too, or 9s and 10s. So, you know, if everyone contributes, then that's great, and we certainly notice it, and it's an easy way to get good points.
Right. So that's something that you all should keep in mind when you're doing your Q&As today. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut off, Katie.
No, I just wanted to say, so I think a lot of this seems like, you know, there's a lot of pieces to this and it's a little overwhelming, but I think a really important thing to remember is that when you're in your groups, you're going to be spending a lot of time working with them, and you're going to get to know your group mates really well. And that really helps with the participation thing, because you'll get into kind of a sync with each other in terms of being able to flow freely off of each other. So it may be a little awkward in your first kind of like mock attempts in your very first, you know, like attempts in your classroom, to like have everyone come in, but I promise that like it becomes less scary over time, and that's something that you really were going to build, you know, that kind of connection with your group to have that be comfortable and more natural. And so just wanted to put that out there.
Claire asks, are there videos on the internet of winning teams that we could watch? And definitely there are resources there. I'm sure we as CACE folk and your teachers also have other videos and resources that they can show you, school specific or generally good testimonials or good hearings in total to listen to.
And my understanding is that the entire national finals is available to view from last year and the year before, if I'm not mistaken.
I think there's a bunch of years, and in fact, I think I was just looking at that in getting ready for this. Let me see if I can find it, and I'll post it in the chat if I do.
Yeah. Does anybody else have any questions? I'm sure that you all have lots of questions. Some of them are going to be answered when we do our We the People hearing, because I know that a lot of you are thinking, I don't understand how this works. So we're going to show you how it works. Mr. McBride just put in the link for videos. So any other questions? Okay, well, we are running a little bit ahead of schedule, and that's fine. That's good, because of Mr. Riano, who couldn't make it, unfortunately. So now is probably a good time to take, we'll call it a 13-minute break. I realize it's probably a little bit longer than we need, but a 13-minute break. We'll all be back here at, I guess it's 11 o'clock. I'm in Minnesota, so my timing is all off, but we'll all be back at 11 o'clock. How's that sound?
Yeah, 11.
Great, thank you.
All right, see you at 11, everyone.
Okay, and where we're gonna do alumni stuff. So alumni, get ready. Okay, great. So one thing so what we're about to do is show you a We the People hearing. The folks who are going to be giving you that We the People hearing are alumni volunteers from the last 2 years. They are giving back to the program in a wonderful way. I actually gave them an assignment 2 weeks ago to write a testimony that they put together. Like, they're not getting graded for it. They've all graduated from high school. Some of them are in college. They get 0 academic credit for it. All they get are civic virtue points and the satisfaction of giving back to the program. And I really just want to highlight that. This is a thing that we've been doing for the past few years. It's like my favorite part of the summer sessions. And it allows, as I said earlier, it's going to allow all of you to see what a hearing is, and to see how students who have done it at an extraordinarily high level present and answer questions.
Okay, do we want to do introductions first?
Yes, introduce yourselves as judges, and where you are and what you've been doing and all that sort of thing.
Okay, I can start. My name is Arushi Abchat. I am a Foothill We the People alum from class of 2020, and I was in Unit 5, and now I study English at UCLA.
Hi, I'm Jennifer. I was on Unit 3 at Amador Valley in 2020, and now I'm also at UCLA and I'm studying math and political science.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kira Thornton. I was a Foothill alum of 2020's Unit 4, the best unit. Don't let anyone tell you anything different. I'm now an incoming sophomore at American University, and I'm studying political science. And this summer, I'm actually working on Capitol Hill, which is such an incredible experience.
Hello, my name is Grace Chen. I am from Amador's Unit 4 from last year's team, 2021. And in the fall, I'm attending Cornell University studying policy analysis and management.
Okay, great. Judges, do you want to invite the students to introduce themselves?
Yeah, students, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Good morning. My name is Ananya Kutikad, and I graduated from Foothill this year. I was a member of Unit 2, and I'll be going to Boston College in the fall to study political science.
Good morning. My name is Barrett Fahey. I was a member of Unit 5. I was actually Arushi's child, and I graduated in 2021. I'm going to George Washington University, also in DC with Kira, and I'm going to be majoring in international affairs.
Hi, everyone. My name is Krishna Prakash. I was part of Amador's Unit 6 in 2020. I'm a rising sophomore at Northeastern University up in Boston, and I major in political science and international affairs.
Good morning. My name is Robert Gann. I was last year's Foothill High School Unit 6 member, and I am going to be studying political science at UC Berkeley this fall. We would like to thank the judges, audience, volunteers, and timekeeper for being here today.
And all time.
Wonderful. So your question today is, what is We the People? How did We the People impact your understanding of rights, responsibility, and citizenship? You may begin when you're ready.
We the People is an experience and can be reliably likened to a cult. Like conspiracy theorists, we find ways to link eggs to procedural due process and burritos to the rule of secrecy within our formal congressional testimonies. All jokes aside, this program is centered around civic education, teaching students about political philosophy, the origins and functions of our government, important eras of American history, and even international affairs to a degree.
The impact of We the People cannot be understated. The opportunity for students to understand and interact with the principles of government is incredibly unique to this program. We discussed the First Amendment and its applications to our very own lives. Tinker v. Des Moines of 1969 defined the right for students to express themselves in a school setting, which We the People students have utilized to better their understanding of themselves and the government. Understanding just how much of an impact our voices can have and should have, as confirmed by the Supreme Court, only reaffirmed to us the importance of civic engagement in our own lives.
The best aspect of We the People in its focus on rights is the nuance it offers. Instead of passive study and comprehension of the existing government, it is to connect it to a real world, identify its shortcomings, and criticize its failures. The intermixing of each right when the expression of one crosses over into the denial of another. Our most passionate discussions focused on the intricacies of the right to expression, where some groups have strict limitations and others have far more freedoms, especially in terms of Masterpiece Cake Shop v. Colorado Civil Rights Commission 2018, or the time the Supreme Court debated whether we could chant bong hits for Jesus.
In regards to responsibility, We the People's emphasis on the Constitution's history has highlighted the need for discussing its features in the modern day. The Constitution's optimistic framers outlined their ideal America by prioritizing compromise and leaving room for adaptability within the document. Still, the convention's decision to avoid major discussions of slavery and suffrage created a large divide between America's new government and revolutionary principles of inalienable rights and popular sovereignty, ultimately precipitating in the Civil War and Reconstruction amendments. Though the framers were politically experienced, this divide proves their decisions were not faultless. James Madison notes in Federalist 51 that men are not angels. This statement applies to the framers as well.
Looking forward from the era of the framers, we quickly realized our responsibility as individuals and students to address contradictions between the revolution's goals and our current government. In an election year, this included watching presidential debates, speaking at city hall meetings, and volunteering with campaigns. And in the context of the program, this involves spending hours compiling evidence to provide the strongest defense for our testimonies, even if it meant our college applications were submitted at 11:59 p.m.
Lastly, the program teaches its students that citizenship is a verb, not a noun. As communal members of a democratic state, there are actions we are all obligated to take. We the people will pose a wide variety of questions about the modern struggle of voting rights, the importance of youth-led activism, and deeply contentious aspects of American society. More importantly, it connects students to these issues and consequently spurs better and deeper engagement in our politics.
This simple benefit may seem cliche, but building a habit of active, educated citizenship is a clear way we can uphold and in some cases save democracy. In a period of democratic backsliding or the worldwide degradation of democratic norms, this is urgent. French philosopher Alexis de Tocqueville, when first visiting the American colonies, wrote, "The health of a democratic society may be measured by the quality of functions performed by private citizens."
While he never could have imagined that those private citizens would be a group of discontent high schoolers, we can say with confidence that civic education programs like We the People fulfill the responsibility of creating an educated populace. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So my first question for all of you today is, can you please tell me about how We the People has enriched your knowledge of American civics in comparison to your classmates who did not enroll in We the People?
Sure, yeah. As a college student this past spring, I found that my experience in We the People had me have a really great understanding of what citizenship was, even before the rest of my class had even heard about the different types. My professor would ask a question about different types of citizenship, and I think that only myself and one other person who was in We the People was able to fully answer that question.
Yeah, and for me personally, I think that one of the biggest and richest discussions that my unit had was about the differences between delegate and trustee theory. And I noticed one time when I was discussing it with my friends who were not in We the People, that they had kind of memorized it as simply a sort of vocabulary word for a test, and that they didn't have nearly as much motivation to try and kind of discover the intricacies or like discuss whether or not one or the other should be applied to American politics. So I think the nuance is really what was we had an advantage in that.
I think that another huge benefit and also kind of a curse is quite simply, you're going to be angrier. In general, talking with friends, you're going to be thinking of issues and political problems that very few people think about in their day-to-day lives, unfortunately, like the filibuster or the fact that the Senate requires 60 votes in order to pass anything. And I think that while it may seem like sort of a curse to be cursed with that kind of knowledge and be so frustrated with the problems that we have to face that not many people, again, know about, it is also important to use that energy in a productive way, which we have all done. For example, I've been a representative for the Pleasanton's Energy and Environment Committee, and multiple members of this unit have been with a PAN network, which is a student activism program that was very active during the 2020 elections.
Awesome. I have a question as well. So you guys identified in your testimony the First Amendment and in particular school speech concerns as a really valuable part of your We the People education. How do you guys plan to exercise your right to freedom of speech on school campuses moving forward?
I think one thing, I'm going to be very lucky to have the opportunity to be right on the White House. And one of the things I'm looking forward to most is now that I understand that I have this freedom, I have speech, and that cannot be taken away from me, so long as I do not incite violence as defined by Brandenburg v. Ohio, 1969. I can use that power to argue for the things I'm most passionate about. And it's also, in my understanding of We the People, I've learned that just because these figures are in government does not mean that they're all knowing, does not mean that everything they say is moral or just or is the automatic answer. And we also have our opinions and we have our beliefs, and they're just as important as the people in power. And so using your voice to protest for what you believe, especially in a school setting, because that's where you spend most of your time, that's where you learn everything, it's one of the most important essentials of being a citizen today.
And to further that point, it's especially important to know that your elected officials are reachable. This past semester, I was able to co-found an ACLU chapter on Northeastern's campus, and as a result, we were able to talk to Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, who directly answered our questions and was also very responsive to our letter writing campaigns. And without the program, I wouldn't have realized how much of my responsibility truly laid in reaching out to my elected officials and making sure that people's voices and questions were answered.
So you guys mentioned that We the People did impact your understanding of a lot of things within like the civic knowledge sphere, but is there anything that you guys would change within the program specifically, and why?
I think one of the biggest improvements that We the People can make to an already great program is allowing students to at least view their competitors after competitions have already taken place. One of the biggest frustrations that we had, and I'm sure that my unit mates would agree on this, is that after competitions, we would find out that we lost to Irvington or Amador or whatever school again, or that the government academy of whatever it is in Virginia won the nationals again, surprisingly. And we would not be able to know just what they did to actually get it, and we wouldn't really know what we could improve on when compared to our peers. And so I think that that would be one of the biggest changes that we would put for.
Yeah, and I think one of the other changes that was made during our year, 2021, that I think should be continued within the program is the fact that we had a lot of coordination with judges from outside the state because of the technology that we had available to us. I think that was really useful because hearing as many different opinions on testimony as possible was something super helpful, especially when approaching the national cycle, when different judges or different states had kind of different opinions about what We the People testimony should be. So I hope that in the future that that CACE and We the People continues to kind of foster that collaboration between different regions.
I have a question. So in terms of, you guys mentioned a lot of good pieces of evidence within the testimony and things you've learned throughout the year. However, a lot of this, I think, knowledge can also come from an AP Gov or a regular civics class. So how does We the People differ from like other academic classes that are still government-based, like AP Government or civics?
I think one thing I noticed, although in Foothill, we don't take AP Gov, we take 2 periods of We the People instead. I did take the AP Government exam, and I think one thing that We the People teaches us that cannot be found in that sort of class is the actual opportunity to voice your own opinions. Whereas AP Government and other sorts of classes, they teach you to understand this is how the process works, this is how the government is structured, and this is how you can insert yourself. The way We the People works is it allows you to actively think, how could this be improved? How would you decide how to do this? What are your thoughts and opinions? And so getting that option, especially during the AP Government exam, getting to see the questions and realizing I had so much room in my heart, like in We the People, to explain, I disagree with this Supreme Court decision, or I disagree with this bill passed by the legislative. Whereas in AP Government, it would sort of be a matter of, this bill was passed, how will it affect everything else? But it leaves out the nuance of it all.
In addition, entrusting an organization like College Board to fulfill 100% of your civic education doesn't always work out. For example, in AP Gov, they teach you that Marbury v. Madison of 1803 is actually the court case that established judicial review in the country, but someone in We the People, for example, has the opportunity to do further research and realize that cases like Hilton v. United States of 1796 had a role in first providing judicial review because it upheld a law that already existed as opposed to whatever happened in the Marbury case. And you'll also find the historic origins came from England, as opposed to this idea that the framers invented a concept that has long preceded them.
Done. It's actually time a little bit before that, but I wanted Krishna to talk about Marbury versus Madison.
Should we do a little bit of feedback, Claire?
Yes, judges, give a little bit of feedback.
Okay, I can start. So really good job, everybody. I loved how you all built off of one another and came prepared with your evidence. Obviously, this is a little bit of an easier one because we're talking about our own personal experience and not super complex and nuanced constitutional law. But I think this is a really good example for all the new We the Peoplers of how you can work together with one another, even over Zoom. I also think that you all did a really good job there was a couple like awkward pauses. Obviously, you guys have not been like a real unit for weeks and weeks, but you worked together really well. And I also thought your testimony was well written, easy to follow, and addressed all the parts of the question. So good job.
I can go ahead and give feedback next. So first, I thought your testimony was really clean and organized and super easy to follow. I liked that you guys added in some court cases. I think I heard Tinker v. Des Moines and Morse v. Frederick, so I really appreciated that as a Unit 5 person. And then in terms of hot seat, I thought you guys all had really varied responses, and it never ended up being that like one person was taking up too much of the speaking time. You guys really passed it around, and I really appreciated that as well. And I loved Christian's response on Marbury Madison as well.
I'll echo everything Arushi and Kira have said. I thought there was really good participation and all of us got to get in a question, which is good. And then especially since you guys like haven't really prepped and like been drilled in Q&A. I thought you guys had good answers. Maybe they dragged a little, but shortening that comes with time, obviously. And I love the Pleasanton citations with Pan and stuff from Robert. I thought that was really good to bring in. And then also for Arushi's question about freedom of speech on school campuses, I think someone started with a really good Brandenburg citation, but they didn't address the school campuses part, which then Krishna then picked up on and then kept going to fully answer the question, which is also a really important part of Comp Civics, is just making sure you've answered all the parts and building off of your unit mates. So I thought you guys did a really good job with that, and just overall, good job.
Yeah, I was really impressed for like a 2-week prep kind of thing with people from different schools and different units. So really great job. For the testimony, even though like the prompt was kind of like, I would say broad and like not super like topic specific, I think you guys did a great job of incorporating a ton of evidence, especially from like different eras, different genres of evidence, like court cases, the Federalist Papers, even some philosophy. So great job on that. I would have liked to seen like one constitutional citation because that is on the rubric as we went over, but it's okay. For Q&A, I thought you guys did a great job of building off of each other despite it like only being a 2-week practice time. Also, I really like the intro in the testimony, and then like the citizenship is a verb. I like the phrasing of that. And I also really liked some of the ideas you guys had, like viewing the competitors' videos after competitions. I also would like that to happen. That's a really great idea. I also like that you guys were able to sneak in like court cases and evidence within the Q&A, despite it being more like personal anecdote based. It's a great job with that as well.
All right, great job. So for folks who, might not have picked this up, the panel, the student panel there, they had the testimony, they had the question that they wrote the testimony, the prepared statement. But they didn't know, right, what Q&A questions they were going to get once we got into the Q&A, or if you're Foothill, once you got into hot seat. And so it's something that people, when they watch We the People hearings, and if you do watch some of the We the People hearings that people dropped in the chat, the questions oftentimes come completely out of left field, and you may or may not have prepared for them. And you have to, just sort of go off the cuff. Every person here, I know, every alumni here can think of a specific time, either in practice or competition probably, where they got a question that they had never heard before or had never even really thought about and had to answer it in the best way that they could. And so it's a skill that everybody here is going to learn how to do. I really liked the testimony. I thought it was great. I don't know how I feel exactly about it's sort of a cult thing, but I can't. I've heard that before, and I can't say it's not. We don't have a cult leader, is the thing, so it's not like that. But the idea with civic education and CACE and We the People is that we want to instill in everybody a need to sort of give back to the community and give back to We the People. Oh man, Krishna just mentioned Augustus Chin. Yes, he is. If any of you are lucky enough to go to nationals, you'll meet Augustus Chin, and he is just a magnificent person in so many different ways. So I just really want to commend everybody for doing that. Does anybody have any students have any questions for the alumni panel? Anyone?
Did being in the class change your original political views before entering the class?
That's a good question. Which is, did We the People change your political views in any way?
I think it kind of reinforced ours a lot. I think definitely Robert and I can agree.
Radicalization.
Yeah, it was a lot of
Complete
radicalization.
radicalization.
There were, because I think most of the people you'll find are kind of left-leaning. So it's very fun when you do have people in your unit who are, because I think my unit, out of most in our year at least, it was like a 50-50 split with like right-leaning views and then left-leaning views. So we had a lot of fun like debates, and so it made testimony really interesting because I would say I completely disagree with this case, and then my other unit mate would be like, I can't believe anybody would disagree with it. And so then during the hot seat, we would get a lot of like fun questions.
Did
you notice?
I had a unit mate who came in completely convinced he was a Republican. And kind of through the year, we literally kind of just were like, hey, do you think maybe you're just choosing this opinion because it's the Republican one, because it has the little R next to it? And maybe we should think about like the facts and things like that. And then now he's like, okay, I guess I'm a moderate now. So it definitely will change you, but I really encourage everyone to be open-minded. I, for like a little bit, refused to like even think about like talking for and testimony on the side that I didn't agree with, but it actually makes you a smarter and more well-rounded person to do research into the side that you strongly disagree with. So that's something that you'll definitely get out of this program.
Yeah, and I think yeah, but I agree. It's also like you become so much more knowledgeable about both sides because you need to research it. So if you're asked and you have like pushed back on, you have a lot of research to be like, no, this is my opinion and this is why. So you gain a lot of knowledge from both sides. You learn arguments from both sides. And like when I came in, I was really like, no, like everything Republican is wrong. Like there is no basis behind any of their arguments. But once you really start diving into specific topics and seeing like what they are arguing and where they're coming from, then it's really interesting to be able to analyze and admit that like, oh yeah, sometimes I can understand why this would be the case. But I think it's just really enriching. And also if you get into arguments with like family members, you can just be like, no, you're wrong. And this is why this. So it's honestly like really, it's just good to see both sides.
Yeah, and just wanted to add that like, I think for me, I don't know if I got like more or less radical, but I do think that, so I was in unit 2, which is one of the more historical ones. And I'd say compared to unit like 5 or 6, you're less current events focused. And I think for me, it was really good to be able to like see the historical context because it kind of gave me a little bit more insight and made my views more based in like history. And I think that was really useful. So I'd say that each unit has its own strength and that it'll like change your views or at least your attitude towards government and policy.
I just, sorry, I just wanted to toss out a very common question that students ask at this phase, and I'm hoping the panel can answer for me. So you delivered your testimony there, your prepared speech, and then you were asked those follow-up questions for a while. How do you know how long your answers are supposed to be in the follow-up questions, and how many people should speak when each follow-up question is asked? I'll take my answer off the air.
Yeah, I think I can speak to this question uniquely because our unit was notorious for taking about 1.5 years on each question because, oh my God, we would delve into all kinds of things. And yeah, what Mr. McBride did with us was we would literally like have a stopwatch like in front of our screens during practice sessions and like put a hard cap of 30 seconds on our questions because otherwise we would just keep going and going and going. And then, yeah, also most of our judges also did the 3 fingers of death where they gave us like 3 fingers and it would be 10 seconds each. So it would also be limited to 30 seconds. And after a while, eventually your brain just sort of like absorbs the ability to sort of just register how long 30 seconds is going to be. Thank you, Grace. And yeah, that's something that you just sort of improve with time. And you, as the judges have already said, you eventually learn to play off of each other and work with each other during the time that you have.
And it definitely comes with practice because you will get a lot of questions that are like repeats of each other or have similar similar to questions that you've gotten before. And you'll be able to find like specific pieces of evidence that you'll really like for that kind of question and just use it. And once you practice enough, then you'll be able to consolidate your answers into like really concise, hard hitting, and just like straight to the point. Because judges don't really like to hear you waste your time trying to explain something either. And at the end, like the most important thing is to make sure that you've answered every part of the question that the judge has asked. So if it's like a more simple question, like 2 or 3 people can chime in. If it's like multiple parts, then maybe the entire unit will go. It really depends on just the type of question.
And once you get really used to the format of Q&A or hot seat, whatever you call it, you'll start to realize that what you really need to do is introduce what you're going to say, have evidence to back it up, and then have a sentence or 2 of reasoning through that. So, you know, best case scenario, you have 4, maybe 5 sentences. But again, as Jennifer said, this does come with a lot of practice. And there definitely are questions that you get asked that are kind of set to get all of you to answer the question. If you're asked, you know, what if you could change the Constitution, add an amendment, what would it be? And that's kind of expected that your entire unit will go down the line and, you know, say whatever it is that you think. But other questions can be fully answered by 1 or 2 people. And if that's the case, it's in your best interest to not have the entire unit jump in just to save time.
Yeah, and I think 2 things that were really drilled in for me. One is that you want everyone on the judging panel to be able to ask a question, because then otherwise they will get a little bit like mad because obviously they want to ask. And then the second thing is that you notice that Clint was holding up that 1 minute sign. You really want to run out the clock when that's the case. You don't want to leave any time like between the end of your answer and the end of time where judges don't have enough time to ask a question, or they ask a question and you don't have time to answer it. You really want to make sure that you kind of keep an eye on that 1 minute thing, and that will come with practice. You'll kind of start to recognize that and play off each other for that. So those are the 2 things I would like keep in mind starting off.
And just really quickly, like the last thing, obviously something you have to keep in mind through your entire presentation is how many times each person on your panel has talked, because if one person is giving the entire answers, you're not going to get very good points in a lot of different categories, because something that judges are really looking for is teamwork and is building off one another. I know Clint likes to keep track of like how many times each person has talked while you're doing it, so he'll do like a really intimidating little tally, you know, every time you talk. So definitely important too that if you just spoke, you want to try to avoid speaking again with the new question. Obviously there will be cases where that has to happen, but you do want to avoid that.
Something small that I would just add on is to be, you know, as direct as possible when you answer a question. If it's a question that can be responded to with a yes or a no, lead with the yes or the no, and then deliver your evidence and expand on that evidence, but always introduce your response with a really clear roadmap of where your answer is going to go?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I don't see any other questions. If you have questions, if you're a student and you have questions, I'm sure you have several, hang on to them because you will get an opportunity to ask them a little bit later. So we have reached the great debate, the portion of the first summer session that we like to do, where the three of us, where me and Sean and Daniel are going to talk about the branches of government, how they interact, and most importantly, which one is most powerful. This is going to be not like a We the People testimony in the sense that we're going to be debating each other rather than presenting a unified testimony and then getting into the Q&A. But the alumni and you, everybody here will have the opportunity after we're done to ask follow-up questions that are directed to us as a panel or to individual people if you have an individual question. Afterwards, as we talked about before, you all will be broken up and into units wherein, as a unit, you will have to come up with an answer to the question of which is the most powerful branch of government. Not important, not biggest, it's most powerful. So first we're going to give a little background. Each of us are going to give a little background as to what the founders thought back in when they founded the country, what the framers thought. We're going to talk a little bit about how it's evolved, and then we're going to make our arguments as to which one is more powerful. Then we're going to talk, the three of us are going to talk about how each branch, each of our respective branches has advanced individual rights. And then for the third round, we're going to talk a little bit about how each of our individual branches has advanced the common good. And so, without further ado, I will get started. And I will, as I mentioned before, and as I will continue to mention as we go, I am arguing for the judiciary, the most powerful branch of government. And why is it the most powerful branch of government? Well, first of all, let's go back to the beginning. As you all will learn, if you don't know already, the basic power and structure of each branch is laid out in its own article of the Constitution. The Congress is laid out in Article 1, the executive is laid out in Article 2, and the judiciary is talked about in Article 3. And Article 3 is actually the shortest of the 4 substantive articles. That means it has the fewest limitations on it. And what Article 3, Section 1 says is the judicial power of the United States is vested in one Supreme Court and such inferior courts as Congress decides. It's not limited in any way in the sense that the Congress, for example, which says that the legislative powers herein granted are vested in Congress. No, it is said the judicial power of the United States is vested in that one Supreme Court. Article 3 also says that judges who are appointed to the federal bench serve for life as long as they exhibit quote unquote good behavior and theoretically are subject to impeachment as defined in Article 2, Section 4 for high crimes and misdemeanors, but only one judge or justice sitting on the Supreme Court in the history of the Supreme Court has ever been impeached. That was Samuel Chase in 1804. And I just want to point out that his nickname is literally Old Bacon Face, which is a wonderful nickname. Anyway, he was never convicted. So he continued to sit on the Supreme Court. It's basically been a completely useless check against the judiciary. So every justice who has ever been appointed to the Supreme Court has served for life. Article 3 also mentions a cases and controversies requirement. We'll talk about that a little bit later. It says that you can't change the compensation of the justices, so Congress or one of the other branches can't cut their judge's salary. And Article 3 also says that justices are appointed by the executive and confirmed by the Senate. And that's kind of how justices get there, as we all kind of know. In Federalist 78, Alexander Hamilton, and you guys are going to learn so much about the Federalist Papers, but they're basically a blueprint of what the founders kind of thought about the Constitution before it was ratified. And Federalist 78, in 1788, Alexander Hamilton said, quote, "The courts were designed to be an intermediate body between the people and the legislature, in order, among other things, to keep the latter, the legislature, within the limits assigned to their authority." Hamilton also said that the interpretation of the laws is the proper and peculiar province of the courts. A constitution is, in fact, and must be regarded by the judges as a fundamental law. This is Hamilton talking specifically about what Krishna mentioned in her testimony earlier, judicial review. This is Alexander Hamilton saying that the power of judicial review is vested in the Supreme Court. Well, what is judicial review? I'll talk about that in a little bit, but judicial review is the ability for the Supreme Court to say that law is unconstitutional or that law is constitutional. Either way, judicial review is being used. It is what I would argue the most important and powerful check that any branch has, not just the most important and powerful check that the judiciary has, but the most important and powerful check that any of the branches have against any of them. Because at the end of the day, if we are a constitutional government, the boundaries, who decides what the boundaries of the constitutional are, is crucial. It is paramount. And so, as I'll talk about later, when Congress theoretically passes a law, it's the judiciary that gets to decide whether or not they have, whether or not that law is constitutional. There are no concomitant checks against the judiciary. Sure, there are some checks against the judiciary in the sense that the executive gets to appoint the justice, the legislative gets to confirm it. Theoretically, they could impeach you. Theoretically, they could strip jurisdiction, but they never do those things because Congress never does anything. So there really aren't meaningful checks against the judiciary. Theoretically, if the judiciary issues a ruling that people don't like, they could theoretically pass a constitutional amendment, but that's really, really, really hard. The only meaningful checks against the judiciary are self-imposed. For example, and you're going to learn a lot about this, but the political question doctrine and the rightness and mootness doctrines, these are doctrines that the Supreme Court itself has decided are ways to limit its own power. And the Supreme Court could decide rationally to get rid of those checks. Inherently, they have that power. Judicial review is the most powerful hammer of all of the branches, and it can be wielded broadly against either branch, against the states. The justices are politically insulated in the sense that once they are appointed, the people cannot directly vote them out. They serve life terms. If there was any doubt as to which branch was the most powerful branch, think about how, for example, the Republican Party have fought tooth and nail in lockstep to prevent Merrick Garland from taking Scalia's seat in 2006, to seek Kavanaugh, Justice Kavanaugh, to gain a more solid GOP majority. If there were any doubt as to which were the more powerful branch, look at how quickly the Republican Senate confirmed Justice Amy Coney Barrett after Ruth Bader Ginsburg died. they needed to move quickly because the judiciary branch and the Supreme Court is the biggest seat of power that any branch has in the federal government. They have also gotten stuff done where Congress and the executive have failed. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And so with that, I will pass it over to,
yeah, me. I'll be making the case for the executive. I think there was a lot of yapping there. I'll try to make my case. But all right, thank you for presenting your arguments. I will respectfully disagree with quite a few of them. But before I get into it, I will be using male pronouns because all presidents thus far have been male, unfortunately. But I will start by asking a very simple question. Does potential for power matter when in reality that we prove that its exercise, like lack thereof, is ineffective? So how can a branch of government be considered powerful when it has lost the abilities or the means to flex the muscles given to it by the framers of the Constitution? I mean, when you're looking at the evolution of executive power from Andrew Jackson to FDR to even Obama, I submit that it doesn't matter what the founders thought as to what is the most powerful branch of government today. That said, of all branches of government, none was created by the framers with the powers vested in just one person, well, except the executive. So the president is granted the power to nominate judges and the Supreme Court justices, as well as the cabinet. The framers viewed that these powers were dangerous enough to ensure checks on them by the legislative branch, such as advice and consent of nomination. However, I mean, when we're looking at Congress, especially today, like, what are they really doing, right? An ineffective Congress can lay bare the power of the executive in reshaping the judiciary and the executive agencies. And in Federalist 70, Alexander Hamilton argues for a strong executive leader directly as a result of how weak the executive was under the Articles of Confederation. And while no one wanted another monarch and ensured there wouldn't be using the power of election, America needed a separate president with executive powers to enforce federal law, sign or veto legislation, and conduct foreign policy. So, as Hamilton said, energy in the executive is a leading character in the definition of good government. With only a few limits, whatever the president wants, the executive branch delivers. He even has the power to, as we've seen in modern history, to wage war without even ever consulting Congress, as long as he doesn't call it war. And this is available, and Congress gave the president this power using the Authorization for Use of Military Force Act. So it isn't even the president's trying here. The other branches concede that the executive is more powerful. So I digress. According to James Madison's notes of debate in the Federal Convention of 1787, the executive really didn't receive much attention in the debates. The actual text of Article 2 is somewhat vague and ambiguous, and which is a flaw, but presidents have been able to exploit it since the beginning of the nation. And from Lincoln declaring the Emancipation Proclamation, and we see this in Ex parte v. Milligan, right? And that's why, as Hamilton desired, the executive is clearly the most powerful branch of government today. And with that, I'll let Sean make his case, which, you know, we'll see how it goes.
Well, it's going to go quite well because it is unequivocally clear in my mind that the founders and the framers believed the legislative branch was the most powerful at the time our form of government was established. And why did it become powerful? It's because the predecessor under the Articles of Confederation did not have a strong enough central legislative body. It did not have the taxing authority that our framers believed that the legislature needed to have. It didn't have power over interstate commerce, and it wasn't centralized under one federal legislative supremacy. The states were running roughshod over the federal government. So what did they do? They established in Article 1 a very strong, very powerful legislative body. And the framers had the most experience with legislatures. There was the House of Burgesses in Virginia and many other legislative bodies. Even the governing bodies during the Revolution were legislative in nature, meeting in Philadelphia and elsewhere. And they called the bodies that formed our government Congresses. So they were quite familiar with the power of legislatures, and they fully intended for the legislature to be the leader of our government, to establish our laws and lead us into this new era of democracy, because that's what they wanted. They wanted these elected officials like themselves, frankly, who had been serving in legislative bodies in their own states, to have that power. And so what did they do? They wrote Article 1 as the longest section of the Constitution, encompassing more than half of the total words in the document. And these are primarily words granting Congress powers and rights, including powers and rights over the several states. And we know this in part because, you can see what's laid out there, and I'll cover that in a minute, but also the 10th Amendment was later enacted in order to make clear that the enumerated powers of the Constitution were the powers granted to the government, the federal government, and other powers were left open to the states. And this is important because when somebody like Clint talks about how the judiciary in Article 3 is a very short section of the Constitution, that's because there weren't very many powers granted to that part of our government, the judiciary. And on the other hand, the legislature had quite a lot of powers granted to it. And when it comes to federalism, the Supremacy Clause, Article 6, Clause 2, is very important because it means that those laws passed by the legislative body of Congress become the supreme law of the land, and they trump and supersede laws passed by other states. And so that's quite important. In addition, one of the most important powers granted to Congress is the power of the purse, right? So we have Article 1, Section 9, Clause 7, the Appropriations Clause, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1, the Taxing and Spending Clause, and some other provisions. And what does this mean? It means Congress controls the country's budget, and it is a gigantic budget. And so Congress wields that power and can control how much money is funneled to the court system, the judiciary, how much money is given to various executive agencies and the military. And that's coming from Congress. The House of Representatives starts the budgetary process and ultimately decides how much money is allocated to our government and where it goes. And that's an extremely important power. In addition, there's an overlap with the executive branch when it comes to many war powers. And in fact, most war powers are in Article 1, right? The ability to raise and support armies, to provide and maintain a navy, to make rules regarding our land and naval forces, to call the militia, and to declare war. And all of these things come out of Congress and laws passed by Congress. With respect to the judiciary, Clint has pointed out that there are inferior courts, right? The Supreme Court is not the only part of the judiciary branch. But in fact, right in Article 1, it says that Congress has the power to control the inferior courts, to constitute tribunals inferior to the Supreme Court in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 9. Right? And we haven't even gotten to the most important power, which is the necessary and proper clause. This is the thing that the anti-federalists were the most worried about. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18 gives Congress the power to make all laws which will be necessary and proper to carry into the execution the powers of the legislative branch and the federal government. James Madison in Federalist 51 talked about it in a Republican government, the legislative authority necessarily predominates. And he's talking about this necessary and proper clause as being fundamental to the legislative branch directing our government where it needs to go. Brutus I, in Brutus I, one of the anti-federalist papers, Robert Yates most likely wrote that it was something that would usurp state power and trample on local and state rights. They were worried about how powerful they had made Congress with this, with our Constitution. So there was concern about eliminating sovereignty and autonomy left to the states and the other branches of government. Hamilton in Federalist 33 talked about it was simply a truism that the necessary and proper clause, along with the supremacy clause, meant that the legislative power was paramount in this country, and Madison agreed in Federalist 44. And so you can see our framers were very focused on this. And then when it came time to ratify the Constitution, people like Patrick Henry were sitting in Virginia, talking about the limitlessness of federal power and how that was a concern. Ultimately, our Constitution was ratified. I'll also note the Commerce Clause is a very powerful part of the legislative powers. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3 allows it to regulate commerce with foreign nations among the several states and the Native American tribes. And this has greatly expanded over the years to give Congress lots of power to enact laws when they interact with interstate commerce. So, we can see here that the legislative branch, certainly at the time of the founding, was indeed the most powerful. So I think next we're going to switch to individual rights, correct, Clint?
Correct. And it is Daniel, then Sean, then me.
So we're going to talk about how each of the branches of government is most powerful with respect to protecting individual rights. Go ahead, Daniel.
Yeah, so I will be making the claim that the executive is the most powerful in protecting individual rights. So President Obama once said, "As president, I have no greater responsibility than protecting the American people." The president takes an oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, which includes the individual rights enumerated in that document. So in the 1960s and 70s, for example, US presidents showed their commitment to international human rights by the executive signing, not through the legislative ratifying, several major human rights treaties, such as the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, the International Convent on Civil and Political Rights, and the International Convent on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. In fact, during the Carter administration, respect for human rights even played a role in determining foreign policy. One of the powers the president has to use to protect individual rights is the executive order, as I think hopefully everyone knows. For example, some of the executive orders on human rights include President Obama providing workspace protection for LGBTQ workers, and we also have President Clinton implementing human rights treaties. And of course, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. Truman desegregated the military. In 1957, Eisenhower federalized the National Guard to desegregate schools in Little Rock, Arkansas. And in 1961, Kennedy established the President's Committee on Equal Employment Opportunity. And additionally, presidents have exercised deferred action or a choice not to use enforcement powers to further individual rights, like President Obama's easing of enforcement of federal marijuana laws, or deferred action for childhood arrivals, or DACA policy. The power to determine when and how laws are applied make the president singularly powerful in protecting and furthering individual rights. And I think this case is even more clear in what programs it decides to fund and how it directs Justice Department in pursuing certain cases that the government will pursue. And moreover, the executive gets to nominate Supreme Court justices, right? I mean, President Obama was able to get Elena Kagan and Sotomayor nominated as the first women of color to be Supreme Court justices. No other branch of government can do that. And I think when the president speaks about civil liberties and individual rights, the world listens. When Congress speaks, who's speaking for Congress? So I rest my case. And I'll pass it off to Sean or Clint.
Yeah, I go second in this segment. Okay, so we're asking in the chat what you all might think about some laws enacted that protect individual rights, or executive orders or judicial holdings from the Supreme Court that protect individual rights. We're curious to hear your thoughts, and we will certainly cover many of those right now. I'm going to start first and foremost with the 14th Amendment to the US Constitution. And this is one that, unlike the Bill of Rights, was enacted through Congress, right? And the 14th Amendment has been instrumental in protecting individual rights, and it included a clause that allowed the legislative branch, Congress, to pass laws to enact the purposes of the 14th Amendment, right? So John Bingham wrote this in large part, and Congress drafted and moved this forward, and it has led to a great expansion of rights, along with the other Reconstruction Amendments, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution, right? And so through these amendments to the Constitution, we've seen other laws enacted, like the Civil Rights Act of 1964, incredibly important. In my mind, maybe the most important piece of legislation this country's ever passed. It includes things like Title VII that protects the rights of employees and individuals when it comes to anti-discrimination, and Title IX when it comes to equality at the collegiate level for women in sports and other things at the college level. So we can see how that amendment has been instrumental in protecting individual rights of this country through Congress. I'll give you another example, Bostock versus Clayton County, Georgia. The court said that the language of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibits discrimination on certain protected categories, applies to discrimination based on sexual orientation, gender identity, and transgender identity. So you can see, and I know I see Clinton rolling his eyes because I mentioned a court case, but that court case cannot exist without the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which is a legislative act. And so, it's also very important because it's protected due process in this country, both substantive and procedural. We have the Equal Protection Clause that is in that provision, and the Privileges and Immunities Clause, which at this point is not really a thing due to the slaughterhouse cases. But what are you gonna do? So Congress can also enact its power to protect individual rights by overturning things done by the other branches of government. So when the executive branch is abusing its authority, the Congress can step in and pass laws to go against that. Similarly, if you see the judicial branch making certain holdings that the legislature disagrees with, sometimes they will step in and change the law in order to abrogate those rulings. So a great example of this is the Lilly Ledbetter Act of 2009. There are some court cases from 1998 and 2007 that went against the intent of the legislature when it came to equal pay in employment, particularly for women. And so they passed this act in 2009, protecting equal pay. And sometimes you'll even see the court inviting Congress or reminding Congress that it has the power to change the outcome of a ruling from the Supreme Court simply by passing a new law. Some examples of this would be in Citizens United and Shelby County versus Holder, where in both instances, the court indicated if Congress makes a change to the law to update it, the outcome will likely be different in the future for those rulings. Some other examples include, Congress has the power to change DACA, to make DACA permanent if it so chooses. And certainly Congress has the power to pass all kinds of laws protecting individual rights. Some other examples that come to mind very recently, last year with coronavirus, Congress passed the FFCRA, which is a law that allowed sick time for employees who are dealing with COVID in their family or that they've contracted themselves. It's the first time there had been a sick time law on the federal level. It's quite important. Last year, we saw the CARES Act giving some disbursements to individuals to help them deal with COVID. And you can see right now that Congress is trying to work on an infrastructure bill and certain spending bills. And so there's so many things that Congress does every year and throughout our history that protect individual rights. And now I pass the torch to Clint.
All right, well, that was nice from both of my colleagues, who I think did a game job, a decent job of making what is, I think, an impossible argument. That anything other than the judicial branch has protected individual rights anywhere close to the level of the judicial branch. I am dropping in the chat a link to the incorporation chart. It is a list, a very lengthy list of every individual right that you all sitting here have as a direct result of the judicial branch wielding judicial review for the benefit of individual rights. It's a long dang list. Almost every single, there was a long list of rights that people, or of cases, excuse me, that people were listing in the chat. Roe v. Wade, Gideon v. Wainwright, Miranda, MAP v. Ohio. All of these are cases that furthered individual rights and were started in the judicial branch and ended in the judicial branch. My colleague Sean mentioned all of these things that Congress could theoretically do. Yes, there has been lots of cases where the judicial branch, the Supreme Court, has said, hey, look, if Congress wants to do something about that, they could. But Congress almost never does, because Congress almost never does anything. Whereas some of the biggest sea changes in American history have been as a direct result of the Supreme Court. Now, I am not saying that the Supreme Court always acts to protect individual rights in the way that they should. I am saying the potential of protecting individual rights there or infringing upon individual rights that is vested in the judicial branch is vast, enormous, and unparalleled among the three branches. For example, and I don't know if anybody was aware of this, but the Supreme Court practically started the Civil War when they decided Dred Scott v. Stanford. Moreover, was it Congress who determined that the 14th Amendment incorporated the Bill of Rights to the states and incorporated all of those rights that are listed on that incorporation chart that I just mentioned? Was it Congress who wrote that into the 14th Amendment? No, they didn't, because again, Congress can't get out of its own way. Rather, it was the courts who did it 50 years after Congress acted, because again, Congress can't get its act together. Now, was it Congress who then limited the executive's war powers? Well, they tried, but the only branch to effectively limit the executive's war powers has been the judiciary when they decided Youngstown Sheet 2 Company v. Sawyer in 1952. Did Congress, for example, desegregate education? Nope, they sure didn't. That was the courts in Brown v. Board. Did the executive get rid of anti-miscegenation laws? Nope, that was the courts in Loving v. Virginia. Did Congress, for example, establish the constitutional fundamental right of privacy? They sure didn't. That was Griswold v. Connecticut. That was the Supreme Court. And one thing that was mentioned in the chat, and going back to the point I made earlier about the Supreme Court not always using its vast power in the best way, is, well, one of the great things that Congress did over 70 years ago was they passed the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Well, guess which branch has significantly limited the enforcement of the Voting Rights Act over the past 10 years? Twice, at least. That was the judiciary in Shelby County in 2012, and then last year, or this year rather, with Brnovich, I don't actually know how to pronounce that, versus the DNC. I can go on and on. The executive didn't legalize same-sex marriage. The courts did in Obergefell. Congress didn't rule, as my colleague mentioned in Bostock, that Title 12 protected the rights of gays and transgender individuals in employment. Congress didn't say anything about that. That was the courts. And so while I acknowledge that my colleagues and the branches that they represent can do some little things about individual rights here and there, they can't come anywhere close to protecting and sometimes infringing upon individual rights as the judiciary can. And so now we're going to talk a little bit about how our branches affect the common good. And I believe it starts with Daniel this time. No, it starts with Sean this time.
All right.
Sean, me, and then Daniel.
So I'm going to launch us into the next section, which is how do each of these three branches of government exercise their power in promoting the common good, or sometimes it's called the general welfare of this country. And I want to make a quick note back on Clint with the judiciary that many of these cases cannot even happen without an act passed by the legislature first. The court must rule on existing law, generally speaking. And so, these rights come out of, and even the common good comes out of these laws that are passed through Congress. And I've already got one comment in the chat about a law that promoted the common good. It's the Freedom of Information Act. I think that's a great example. And so you can see here that these kinds of acts by Congress can promote the common good. And when we talk about the common good, sometimes we're talking about this idea that comes out of antiquity with civic virtue and promoting things for the general welfare of the state. And those things are largely controlled or almost exclusively controlled by acts of Congress. And so we're talking about things like roads and the military and police forces and education and health and welfare and all these things that the benefit of the common good comes out of laws passed by Congress. And most importantly, that power derives from Congress's vast ability to wield the budget of this country, right? So they have, in Article 1, Section 8, it begins with Congress having the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, and imposts, exercises, etc., in order to promote the common defense and general welfare of the United States. So that power is vested in Congress. And that comes through the power of the person I mentioned earlier. In particular, that power has greatly expanded with the inclusion of income taxes. So in 1913 or thereabouts, the 16th Amendment was ratified, and now we have personal income tax. And that dramatically increased the amount of the budget that Congress can wield every year in order to promote the common good. And so they're more powerful now than they ever were before. And roads are one of the reasons that this country is so economically powerful. And so when we talk about the common good, think about back at the time of the founding, people were riding horses. It took forever to get anywhere. Now Congress has passed things like the Federal Highway Act of 1956, the creation of the Department of Transportation, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, the Federal Aviation Administration, that govern our modes of transportation in this country, and allowed infrastructure bills and things that expanded the ability of this country to engage in interstate commerce, one of the provinces of the legislature. And this has dramatically increased the common good in this country by allowing food to travel across the country, by allowing people to fly safely without planes crashing out of the air, and all of these types of laws that help us live our day-to-day lives. And Congress creates and can modify these laws every year. Some others that I want to highlight, OSHA regarding occupational safety, the Fair Labor Standard Act regarding minimum wages, and many other things that we all enjoy in our daily lives. Somebody just mentioned the CARES Act in the chat, the National Labor Relations Act, the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act that have already been mentioned, and these infrastructure bills that I mentioned. And these are all things that impact our daily lives. Another great example in the chat, the Privacy Act, the Social Security Administration. Congress created these things. And they also interact with the other bodies of government by controlling the power of the purse, controlling funds to the military, controlling funds that go to FEMA for emergency relief, that is then exercised by the executive branch. Without those funds from Congress, those powers don't even exist. Similarly, we talked about the inferior branches or the inferior courts in the judiciary branch. I'll also note that Congress controls the federal rules of civil procedure and the federal rules of evidence that control how the court must conduct itself. And so with all of these things, you can see Congress occupies the field, creates things like environmental policy, daily life policies that affect all of us. And through these powers, you can see how the legislature promotes the common good literally on a daily basis. Next up, I think we have, is it Clint, are you going next?
It's me, yeah. And those are some good arguments, I think. But the judiciary itself, and I want to drill down on this concept of common good, because the very concept of the courts is an expression of common good. It's a place to resolve disputes about everything from property rights to your job to contracts, anything. It's to crimes, to fundamental rights. It's a place to resolve those disputes with objective rules, or theoretically objective rules, and without combat, or usually without bloodshed. So in that sense, the branch itself is a common good. The ability of people to resolve their differences in a court is a benefit for everyone. So we don't have this sort of anarchy out there. The courts are there theoretically for everyone. I grant that access to courts is not perfect, but it's there theoretically for everyone, and everyone is theoretically subject to its rulings equally. The branch itself is also a reflection of rule of law, which is another aspect of the common good. My colleague mentioned the CARES Act recently, and some of the things that some of the few things, quite frankly, that Congress did during the pandemic. But one of the things that the Supreme Court did, and has done, and has been doing for over a century, is promoting the common good through public health. There's a case called Jacobson v. Massachusetts, which before last year, nobody had heard of. but it was decided in 1905. And that case held that mandated vaccines for the common good are constitutional and a justifiable use of state power. And that case, with some limitations, was broadly upheld in several cases last term, including South Bay Pentecostal versus Newsom in 2020 and 2021. My colleague mentioned the Commerce Clause as a way in which Congress has this broad power, this necessary and proper clause, and that's true. Sometimes they use it, but who gets to decide the limits of that power? It's, again, the judiciary, and they have decided the limits on that power several times, significantly limiting it, significantly shrinking this sort of broad power. They built it up and then they shrunk it. For example, in Wickard v. Filburn, 1942, Congress, or the Supreme Court, said that Congress could regulate the selling of wheat. In Heart of Atlanta Motel versus the United States in 1964, the Supreme Court said that Congress could regulate interstate commerce or could regulate discriminatory laws in interstate commerce. And then in US v. Lopez and NAF v. Sebelius in 2012, the Supreme Court shrunk that Commerce Clause power to a smaller extent. There's also Equal Protection Clause cases. The Supreme Court has, for example, multiple times upheld the ACA on tax grounds and other grounds, allowing for the common good in the sense of healthcare. And there was also, I want to point out, last year, McGirt v. Oklahoma, where the Supreme Court, not Congress, not the executive, returned a huge percentage of native land to Native Americans in Oklahoma, pursuant to treaties that had been ignored for centuries, or for over a century. So these are some ways in which the Supreme Court and the concept of courts in general further the common good.
Thank you, Clint. Thank you, Sean. I will respectfully disagree with both of you, and I will still take the stance that the executive is the most powerful in promoting the common good. And I think you have to look at the nature of these other two branches in comparison to the executive branch. When you're looking at the legislative branch, it's a very deliberate body. It's very slow moving. And a lot of the time, especially now, you're seeing so much gridlock in Congress. And to pass any of these legislations, it takes a lot of time. And a lot of the times it doesn't have the power to enforce these legislations. It's up to the executive to enforce these legislations as well as execute on them, right? And we're looking at the judicial branch, as we've already been seeing, is that they aren't the ones, they have to wait for cases to come to them. They have to be deciding on cases that have to do with existing law or existing executive actions. So the court is passive in that sense, whereas the executive is energetic and can act proactively, right? So as Theodore Roosevelt stated in his biography, I declined to adopt the view that what was imperatively necessary for the nation could not be done by the president unless he could find some specific authorization to do it. My belief was that it was not only his right, but his duty to do anything that he needs of the nation demanded, unless such action was forbidden by the Constitution or by the laws. In other words, I acted for the public welfare. I acted for the common well-being for all our people, whenever and whatever manner was necessary, unless prevented by direct constitutional or legislative prohibition. Roosevelt applied his expansive view of presidential powers on many occasions, but most notably was his intervention in a national coal strike to broker an agreement between management and labor, and that resulted in binding arbitration. And guess what? Neither the Constitution nor federal law expressly authorized this presidential intervention, but Roosevelt took action anyway for the common good. And similarly, President Ronald Reagan ordered striking air traffic controllers to return to work after the negotiation with the federal government to raise their pay and shorten their work week period fruitless. When they refused, he ordered them fired. And neither Congress nor the judicial branch were able to do anything about it. So in addition to direct action, the ability to pass regulation is also a power of the executive branch, and regulations are tantamount to legislation in many respects. Congress knows that it cannot legislate minutia, and hence when it writes legislation, it leaves large gaps and ambiguities to be filled in by executive agencies or on everything from the environmental and agriculture to housing and employment to commerce and labor and even justice. And we're looking at the Justice Department this year. Their budgetary priorities are very clearly in the interest of the common good. So this year, they're really beefing up their antitrust divisions to explore breaking up tech companies or a lot of these oligopolies in the country to better promote the consumer interests and protect the common good. And more directly, there's also been a bigger emphasis on criminal division, especially what happened with the murder of George Floyd and the protest movement around holding police accountable. So that is up to the Justice Department to actively pursue those cases to protect the common good. And we also see a bigger emphasis on protecting COVID fraud, fraudsters trying to defraud folks using COVID and the pandemic as an excuse. And that is up to the Justice Department to be able to actively protect the common good, that neither the judicial branch has the expediency to do so, nor Congress has the executive might to be able to enforce. So, and this is why I believe the executive branch is the most powerful branch in promoting the common good.
Okay. All right. So that's the debate. We are running maybe a little bit behind schedule. So we'll take a very few questions.
Right. So if you have questions for us about the relative power of the branches that you would like answered, put them in the chat. We already have a really good one, or what I think is a really good one. And here it is. Do you think that the power of the branch changes with the political atmosphere and the specific people who are in power? Over the last few years, we've seen a commitment to people as opposed to principles, which arguably strengthens the power of certain branches. Do you agree with this, etc.? So anyone want to take that question?
Yes, absolutely. It absolutely changes depending on the people in power. With Congress, it changes, the power of Congress changes based on whether it's unified government quite a bit, or whether they decide to, I don't know, filibuster everything or not filibuster everything. And with the Supreme Court, it's similar. I mean, if you have a majority of people in the Supreme Court who believe that the court should be a little bit more active with its power or passive, that certainly changes it.
Yeah, I fully agree. I mean, I think especially in Congress, you see with the Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, now Senate Minority Leader, he wields quite a lot of power over how he interacts with other branches of government, rushing people through the appointment process when there was unified control with the Republican Party, and then under the Obama administration, really stymieing a lot of what the executive branch was trying to do. So it is very important. Daniel, do you want to add anything before?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, laws are only as perfect as the people behind them, right? So when you're looking at, I mean, you could have a very okay law, but depending on who's enforcing it, it could be a very, powerful law or really weak law, right? And I think we saw especially, right, with, the presidency of Donald Trump that it's very, very scary when you have a singular figurehead to be able to galvanize so much political support over some of the most wild ideas. And I think, if anything, that demonstrates how dangerous and powerful the executive branch is.
Yeah. Okay, keep your questions coming. We're going to do maybe two more. I see a couple in the chat already that are very good. I like this one. Are federal agencies explicitly under the executive branch, or do they operate with different powers from each branch? I'll let Daniel take this, but I will note that in some ways, executive agencies are authority that's vested by Congress to the executive branch, sort of a delegation to the executive branch.
Yeah, that may be true, but at the end of the day, Congress can't delegate minutia. So, so yes, federal agencies are controlled by the executive branch. There are some notable exceptions, though. For example, the Federal Reserve is an executive agency, but it legally cannot be influenced by the executive branch. And I think there are a couple of other agencies, such as like the Government Accountability Office or the Congressional Research Service, or no, Congressional Research Service, that's actually legislative branch. But there are some exceptions, but for the most part, executive agencies are under the executive, which, you know, builds the case that the executive is very, very powerful. We have a massive bureaucracy in our government. So
I would just note that the fact that executive agencies exist is only allowable because the Supreme Court decided that the non-delegation doctrine did not prohibit it.
Duly noted. So next question, which branch is most easily controlled or held accountable by the people, and does that make it more or less powerful? I will actually go ahead and say I think the legislative branch is probably the most influenced by or held accountable by the people just through the sheer voting process, especially in the House of Representatives. And, you know, we've seen, especially this decade, or I guess we're now in the 2020s, but in the last decade, some surprising primary elections where, you know, the people in certain states or districts felt that individuals were not adhering to what they wanted, and there was a changing of the guard as a result of voting principles. I also think with town hall meetings and things of that nature, the legislature is just much more connected and in tune with what the people want. In a good, for better or worse.
Sorry, the judiciary is not accountable to people in any way, and I think that that's actually a source of their power.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the president is absolutely accountable. I mean, like Jimmy Carter, right? Like after the Iran Contra affair, he basically lost power because of popularity. So,
yeah. Okay, so I think
all right, well, we had a great debate in my room. I don't know about the rest of you, but I heard some good stuff, and disappointed they didn't love my legislature, but what you gonna do?
my room voted correctly. So,
well, Katie, are we gonna run a poll here?
Yeah, Katie has set up a poll that she's gonna drop into the chat that we want you all to vote on. If you're an alum, you don't have to vote,
And you do not have to vote as a monolith with the people in your room. So if you have disagreement, you can you vote your own.
Yeah, it's showing the results, but vote your own conscience.
Oh, yes! Come on!
I'm disappointed.
How many votes are there? Can we tell?
We have 27 participants have voted. There are 36 folks in the meeting. That includes volunteers. Getting close.
Can I vote for the people who dropped off because?
Oh yeah. If you're volunteering people and students in your group left, go ahead and vote. Okay.
Wow, Clint.
It looks like it's paused. So I'm gonna. Oh. Okay, things moved.
All right. Any final votes? Get them in.
Yeah, get them in. 5, 4, 3.
Oh my God! No!
1. Okay, that's the end. Oh, the results disappeared. Give me 1 second. I can get them back.
I got them.
Okay.
I took a picture. Oh, that hurts. So the results are only 22% of you voted for the executive, 36% of you voted correctly, and 41.7% of you voted for the legislative. I don't know what you guys think Congress is doing these days, but
as you go through We the People, your opinion of Congress will change. Yes. I'm calling it right now. It will change.
Better or worse.
Yeah.
So, and I think it's really worth noting also how these votes change from year to year, depending on what we're seeing happening in Washington, D.C. And, with different presidents, different Congresses, different elections, different recent court cases, I think, from year to year, everyone's opinion on this can change pretty rapidly. And, whether we're at war or not might influence your opinion about the executive. And so I think it is interesting to see how this changes a lot. And somebody noted in the chat that last year Congress just got really dumped on. I was definitely last place, and the executive ran away with it as far as the vote goes. So a little bit of a different result this year.
Yeah. Okay. So great work, everyone. Really appreciate it. Next session is in 2 weeks. Hopefully, we will have Chris Riano. If not, or we will have a visit from Cheryl Cocalia, who is the state coordinator. We're going to be talking about natural rights and classical Republican philosophy. Really sexy stuff. So hope to see you there. If you have any questions in the interim, you can email us, or you can add us on Twitter. It's case_tweets, or you can add our Instagram as Casetagram, and we have a website. We also have a Facebook page, and I think it's linked in the agenda. So we will see you in a couple of weeks.